Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my final verdict on the Zeiss Loxia, and this is the 21mm F2.8 Distagon design. Now, in my first look episode, which I would encourage you to take a look at if you want a more thorough examination of the build and the design, some of the feature set of the lens, but I will recap a few highlights from that episode here. First of all, this is a beautifully made lens. It is, in many ways, is a lot like the classic Zeiss series. And in fact, I spent time with the Distagon 21mm F2.8 in a Canon, what Zeiss calls a ZE mount. And so in a lot of ways, it's very similar to construction of that, all metal and glass, the satin or anodized metal finish on it. A focus ring that's all in metal, beautifully ribbed. But there are a few distinctives here that do set the Loxia series apart. One of those is that unlike the classic Zeiss series, there is some weather sealing included in that. And so that certainly is a plus. And at least as far as it goes with a Canon mount, another area where it differentiates is that the Canon EF mount used an electronically controlled electromagnetic aperture diaphragm, which means you just change the aperture value from within the camera body. The Loxia series does feature a manual aperture ring, and that will be of either preference or not preference to some. I don't actually personally mind a manual aperture ring, and in some ways I feel like it makes me a little more conscientious of aperture itself, a little more intentional about the way that I use aperture. But one plus here compared to a lot of manual focus and manual aperture lenses that I've used is the fact that the aperture is set up in 1/3 stop clicks. And so, for example, between f2.8 and f4, you actually have two other options in between there, f3.2, f3.5. And so it just gives you a little more finite control over the aperture. But also inherent in this design is the dual nature of these lenses, and I'm going to be touching on that a fair bit in this final review, in that Zeiss has not just designed the Loxia series with stills photographers in mind. Now, you don't have to be a video person to appreciate these lenses. I suspect that anybody that does just stills photography is going to love them for a lot of reasons. I mean, they're fantastic lenses. But Zeiss has been conscious of the fact that mirrorless bodies, like Sony's, and of course this is a Sony FE or E mount lens. It is designed for Sony mirrorless cameras, and the unique thing about the Loxia series is that while they're extremely compact, they, similar in that sense to the Zeiss 2.8 series. The Zeiss 2.8 series, however, is designed only to cover the APS-C image circle, whereas the Loxia series covers the full frame image circle. And so what you are getting here is, a lens that is, as I mentioned, is designed for the dual purpose of capturing video as well. And so one of the options you have is that if you use a small tool, and I highlight how this works in that episode I mentioned, there is a spot on the back of these lenses where you can actually rotate with that tool, and there you just stick it in the slot, you rotate it to the opposite side, and it will create a declicked aperture. And so that will allow you to, if you're shooting video, for example, it will allow you to do aperture racking. And aperture racking simply means that, say you open up with a narrow depth of field shot, and then you gradually increase that depth of field by closing down the aperture. It's a technique that a lot of videographers will use, and of course it is much easier to accomplish with an aperture that does not have any clicks or aperture detents along the way, and so you can just smoothly go from one to another. Other people may find that it's just their preference for changing aperture as well. But the nice thing is you have the option of doing both of those things here. Another thing that I want to highlight that's extraordinarily important to the Loxia series is that, one of the frequent laments of a lot of people that bought into the idea of mirrorless cameras as being smaller, lighter alternatives with, equally fantastic image quality, maybe even better image quality, is that unfortunately far too often equivalent lenses designed for FE, and of course the the Sony 24-70 f2.8 G Master lens that I reviewed earlier this year springs to mind. A lens that's actually physically larger and heavier than the DSLR counterparts. And so a lot of people have kind of been let down by that. The amazing thing about the Loxia series is that they are giving you a full frame lenses, but in this extremely compact size. And so that is a huge asset. Now I have here, out of my own kit, I have the Tamron 85mm f1.8 VC lens. Now, this lens has nothing to do with this lens other than the fact that it is roughly the size of the Distagon f2.8 21mm lens from Zeiss for DSLRs. So I wanted you to see the visual comparison here. Not that this is an identical lens, but it's roughly similar in length and in girth. And as you can see, we're talking about an extraordinarily smaller lens. The Canon or Nikon Distagon lens has an 82mm front filter thread. This Loxia Distagon lens has a 52mm front filter thread. And in fact, that's one of the other areas where Zeiss has really designed these lenses with the dual nature of cinematography in mind. Of course, cinematographers prefer a beautiful manually focusing lens to begin with. I mean, the action is much smoother, and often they're going to be using geared follow focus systems. These lenses have been designed for the ground up for that. They all share a roughly similar diameter. All of the 5 Loxia series have a 52mm front filter thread, which is really quite an accomplishment with a wide focal length like this. And they're also designed for, you can get the Lens Gear Mini that fits perfectly on these, and it sets them up for that perfect width for a geared focus follow system. And so, a huge asset there for those that are wanting a lineup of lenses that are going to deliver similar color science, that are going to deliver, similar image quality, but then are also physically homogeneous to allow them to be more easily swapped in and out into these types of systems. And so Zeiss has been very intentional about the design of the Loxia series, and so that certainly is a plus. The only negative that I can really point to as a part of this design is that I did note that because both the front portion of the barrel rotates, that's where the focus ring is, and also the rear portion of the barrel rotates, because that's where the aperture ring is, and there's nothing else that's stable there. Mounting and unmounting the lens, it becomes an acquired technique. You have to really kind of grasp the lens as a whole to physically mount it, because everything will rotate on you otherwise. And so it's not a huge deal, but you do have to, kind of retrain yourself in the way that you're going to unmount the lens. But as far as the image quality or the build quality goes, everything here is really quite extraordinary. Now, in a second episode, I covered the image quality, and if you would like to have a very detailed breakdown of image quality, I recommend that you take a look at this episode here, where I do that more thoroughly. But as I examined the image quality from the Loxia 21mm, I found a whole lot to be delighted about. For one thing, it is sharp from wide open. And the sharpness extends quite close to the corners of the frame. Basically, the only difference that you're seeing is that as you stop down to f4, that sharpness profile creeps a little bit further into the corners, and then at about f5.6, it peaks and you have the most even sharpness across the frame. So that's kind of your go-to landscape aperture with this lens. But beyond that, it has a relatively moderate amount of vignette, which is again a significant accomplishment considering how small of a front element and front diameter of the lens there is. But I would say that vignette is actually probably at least a stop better than, say, the Milvus 18mm f2.8 lens and a lot of the popular zoom lenses that cover this wide angle focal length. Most of them have heavier vignette than what this lens does. And basically by f4, it has essentially completely cleared up and becomes a non-issue. As far as distortion goes, it has once again, quite a minor amount of barrel distortion. It does have a slight bit of a mustache pattern to it, and so you're going to want to use the profile to correct it, either in camera or in your editing software of choice. but at the same time, it's mild enough that it's not going to be a significant issue. And I found that it worked quite well for me for shooting city architecture type shots. I mean, it wouldn't be my top pick for doing real estate type work, for example, but I think having a more dedicated lens for that is probably a wise decision if that's your actual gig. But as far as the distortion, I found the distortion to be quite low. I found that overall flare resistance was really quite good. You know, you can get a little bit of veiling right at the epicenter of the sun. You can get a little tiny bit of ghosting, but it's basically a non-issue for practical purposes. Beyond that, I also found that chromatic aberration control is exceptionally good on this, and it doesn't really exhibit either longitudinal or lateral chromatic aberrations. And so once again, that allows the lens to have fantastic contrast wide open. Again, a huge plus. And so optically, there's a whole lot of good that is going on there. I also found that unfortunately, the weather did not cooperate, and it has been overcast the entire time, save one night where I missed my opportunity to go out and shoot astro. And so unfortunately, I haven't been able to do that, but I did use a laser pointer type test to, you know, kind of create the same scenario. And what I found, as you can see here, compared to, say, I'm also testing the Sigma 24mm F1.4, you can see how the Sigma has some chromatic distortion, quite obviously, along the edges or the corners of the frame, whereas the Loxia lens does quite a good job of keeping, you know, fairly uniform star points. And so it is also a useful lens for shooting astro. And so in summation, I have to say that of the Loxia series, I have the whole set other than the 25mm on hand right now, and I'm kind of testing them all side by side. The 21mm is my favorite of the series. And for the simple reason that this is such an amazingly compact and competent package at a focal length that's really kind of in the sweet spot for shooting a lot of things like landscape. It's very useful, I found, in city and street type work. It's useful, you know, just for going along in the woods on trails. It's a useful focal length and so amazingly compact. And one of the things that I think is too often overlooked is the fact that if you have a massive prime lens, it means that you have to really be intentional about wanting to go out and use that lens. A lens that's this size, if you're a backpacker or you're going around the city or you're traveling, you don't have to put a whole lot of thought into whether or not you can bring it along. You know, the hood reverses and the lens stores in an extremely compact fashion. The weight is, you know, it's not insignificant because it's all metal and glass, but at around 350 grams, it's very moderate. And so you can put it into your bag and really not think about it. And so I find with lenses like this, if I bring it along and I don't happen to shoot that focal length, no big deal. But obviously with a much larger lens, there's a good chance it'll never even make it out of my lens cabinet unless I'm going out very intentionally to shoot it. And that is kind of an overlooked value of a compact lens like this. And of course, if you're interested in shooting video, this is a beautiful lens to shoot video with. Great color rendition, you know, great contrast. And because it's light and it's compact, it's an easy lens to put onto a gimbal system, as I did with some of this footage, and just kind of go out and shoot with it and get, you know, beautiful results from it. And so if you are someone that likes to shoot both stills and video, this is a very compelling lens. Or if you're looking for, you envision mirrorless as being small, compact, easy to bring along, this is going to be a very, very intriguing lens for you. And yes, it is manual focus only, but on Sony mirrorless, frankly, manual focus is not nearly as intimidating as what you might think. In fact, it's quite easy to use because as soon as you start to input focus onto the manual focus ring, it will immediately zoom the center portion of the frame, allowing you to easily see what it is that you're working on and to visually confirm focus. There are other manual focus aids that make this very, very easy to use. And so I found that my keeper rate was extraordinarily high. It's an easy lens to use in the field. And so I would say that there's only one fly in the ointment at the end of the day. And that is that this lens, like just about everything else that has this little blue badge right here is not an inexpensive lens. In the US, this lens retails for, you know, right around $1,500, which is a significant amount of money. If there's any consolation, you can look at the Canon and Nikon 21mm F2.8 Distagon lens, and it runs about $400 higher. And so if there's your consolation, it's the fact that while it's expensive, it is less expensive than the DSLR equivalent lenses, and it offers up just as good of image quality, maybe even better in the extreme corners at narrower apertures, or wider apertures, I should say. And so this lens, outside of it being expensive, it is an extremely compelling option and really allows you to achieve that small, light, but optically exceptional combination that you may have dreamed of having when you wanted to go mirrorless. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my written review that's there. You can also find linkage to the image gallery and see more of the photos that I took during my review period. You can also find linkage there if you'd like to purchase one of these lenses for yourself. And thanks to all of you that support this channel by using my links. And also those of you that would like to or have already directly supported this channel by becoming a patron. And there is a link there to show you how to do that down below as well. And of course, if you haven't already, you can click subscribe right here on YouTube. Thanks for your support and thanks for watching. Have a great day.